my good friend Otto. He's a senior lecturer in the MIT Management Sloan School and co-founder of the Presidency Institute. And he's the author of the book, Leading from the Emerging Future. Otto, you know, we discussed this several times before. But before you tell us about what you are doing, what is your insight and how we can lead from the emerging future, can you tell us how you are taking care of your body, mind, and spirit during these classes?
Thank you very much. Hello, Carlos. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me on and join this conversation. So how do I take care of my body, mind, and spirit? Well, I think not traveling helps, right? Already quite a bit. Mm-hmm. I think I'm benefiting a lot of essential workers so that I can stay at home, and probably eat a little more healthy than I would do during travels. Out in nature, long walks, mindfulness practices. So in building that, having that a regular daily routine, that helps me. But then I also liked what Amina said, kind of getting on with the work, right? So that's certainly also something that is nourishing the spirit and all three kind of, and certainly also the mind. And in my case, that resulted in an initiative that I posted a blog like in mid-March, and I suggested, so on the emerging learnings of the Corona crisis and how they relate to climate action. And so I suggested at the end of that very long blog an idea is that we should really create a global learning infrastructure right now where we together lean into the essence, right? Because whenever disruption hits, kind of there's a brief moment where you can clarify for yourself what truly is essential for you, right? So where we connect with our own essence and from there reimagine our journey forward, both on an individual, organizational, but also on the level of our civilization, right? How to reimagine our economies, democracies, learning and media systems and so forth. Within a few days, 10,000 people said, I want to be part of that. And within 12 days, this whole thing was created by a group of 100 volunteers organizing around 7 different language tracks. So this is now a journey called Gaia, Global Gaia as an acronym for Global Activation of Intention and Action. And it's like weekly practices that people, across the planet from all over the place, use. And then every other week we come together for global, Zoom sessions where we break out in small groups and continue that conversation. So it's, and during the first meeting, I remember kind of one of the participants said, everything that I have experienced in my life has prepared me for this moment now. Everything that I have experienced in my life has prepared me for this moment now. And so disruption happens. Radical change is not only necessary, but also possible, kind of. And this is, so the time for this is now. So this kind of feeling and what kind of this woman articulated with this phrase deeply resonated within myself. And that's certainly also nourishing me. That's nourishing my spirit because I feel if I only make a small contribution towards accomplishing that, for example, with doing stuff like Gaia, that's whatever I do in that regard, even though I expend a lot of energy, the more energy I give, the more energy comes back. I think that's what's nourishing me.
Yeah, thank you. So what do you have to share with the leaders of the YMCA and other young leaders around the world today about where we come from, where we are going?
Well, so I am to some degree, I'm really not that familiar really with all the work of the YMCA, and I know little of that. So I want to respond to that question more indirectly by just sharing a little bit kind of from my own context that I have seen, and maybe then leave it to you to do the transfer. What of that is applicable kind of from your to your own situation. So to share a few of these experiences and images and insights. So this is, of course, what I was just talking about, which is kind of the moment we live in, the moment of disruption, right? So, and if you picture ourselves here on the left-hand side, that's how most people on Earth, in my experience, feel about the current situation. And it's not only Corona, it actually started before, but it's much more dramatic now. So we are here. Disruption means the future here will be different from the past. And we know a lot about this, what's broken here. We know less about this, was beginning to emerge, right? Or now, be it 2030 or be it maybe 2022, who knows? And we know least about how to move from here to there, kind of this journey. And what I learned over the years is in dealing with leaders, and I think kind of my first message really would be this kind of situation, and Leslie talked about that, and Amina talked about that, this kind of situation is going to continue, right? So whatever happens in this century, we don't know, but we know one thing for sure: these types of disruptions will increase. So what we need to learn is, how do we respond to a situation like that? And what I learned, I did focus on that, my research the past 20 years. I'm an action researcher here at MIT. And what I learned about that, the answer to that is twofold. It takes a journey that in part is an outer journey and in part is an inner journey that moves you through an inner process of letting go and letting come, and of sensing, going to the edges of the system. So that I think would be my first, my first point of what I have been learning. And the perspective that I'm speaking from is something that you all, I'm sure, have seen many times. It's a systems thinking based perspective. And all systems thinking, as you know, starts with this distinction here, right? With symptoms at the top versus, what you see above the waterline, right? Versus the deeper structural issues below the waterline, right? So, and structures and mental models, or paradigms of thought. So those are like the traditional things we see here. But I think what we have seen over the past few years is a third dimension of these root issues that I call source, and which have to do with the deeper sources of our identity, of our creativity, of who we are and who we want to become. So that's real deep change, transformational change, right? Needs to deal with all four of these levels. So that's all what I'm saying here. And I call this model awareness-based systems change, and it's based on these three, principles. You cannot understand a system unless you change it. It's the famous dictum by Kurt Lewin, kind of the founder of action research. Secondly, you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. So let me rephrase that. You cannot change a system truly, right, unless you address all four of these levels here, right? I could now go into the Corona and spell that out, but we don't have so then that would be the only thing we talk about. So you can do that yourself. You know that from your own situation, right? So you cannot change a system unless you address all of these levels here, unless you transform consciousness, by which I mean transforming the mindsets. Because if you don't transform the mindsets, then the same people, if you just change, say, the structure and so forth, and systems, the same people will create the same problems that they have been creating in the old structure before, right? So real change needs to transform kind of this paradigm of thought and also this deeper source level of that I was mentioning before, which leads us to the third one, which is, so if that's true, right? You cannot change the system unless you transform consciousness. Then the question, of course, is how? So that's where the third one comes in. You cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. Well, we know that from the interpersonal learning, right? Kind of from coaching. We know that from all kind of, we know that from all sorts of therapy work and coaching and leadership work. But what I'm saying is it also applies onto the levels of the whole system, right? We need, on a systems level, we need methods and tools that allow us as a larger system to see and sense ourselves. Because why does that matter? Because when you look at the symptoms here, the results that we enact in almost all systems today, we collectively create results that nobody wants, right? Climate change, inequality. I mean, we heard that earlier in this session here. So the mental health, right, issues. So basically what I'm saying here, the SDGs that were referenced by Amina earlier and by Leslie, they, you can really group them into these three categories, right? So the first 10 are really around the social divide, right? The disconnect between self and other. The next 5 are around the environmental divide and all the issues related to that. But then the last 2 are really around the disconnect between self and nature. And then the last 2 really are, you could say that's kind of more around the deeper spiritual divide, by which I mean the disconnect between self and self, kind of our deeper sources, from which we have peace, justice, partnerships, right? How we work together, the deeper foundations based on which we build co-creative relationships. So, okay, disruption happens, that much we know. I mean, that's no news today. But what I would say is, what you can respond. So what does it mean now from a systems view to look at that? And it means something very simple that relates to how we respond to disruption every moment, kind of every day, but also you can see it on a societal level. Basically, there are 2 ways how we can, 3 ways really, how we can respond to disruption. One is this one here, downloading. We just keep doing the same thing, right? Same old, same old. That's less and less an option, we know that. So that's why the other 2 really matter. You can either turn away and close down, or you can turn toward and lean in. So turn away and close down, right, is really based on a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, and will, aka ignorance, hate, and fear, right? Make America great again. So the most important word of that phrase is the last one. Again, it means you reorient yourself in the past, right? That's the freeze reaction of the mind, heart, will. And that's a lot what we see in the world. But we also see this, turning toward and leaning into an emerging future that we don't even know what it is, which only works if we activate these capacities, opening the mind, opening the heart, opening the will, aka accessing our curiosity, compassion, and courage. That's, so Carlos, what do we need? It's very simple. We need this capacity. What's the problem today? Why do we see all of this stuff here? Because of 2 factors. 1, disruption happens, and 2, a lack of this deeper capacity. And if I am thrown into a situation of disruption and I operate in an environment where I could not in school, not in the other institutions, develop these deeper capacities, I am thrown into this space. We all know that because we all have been there. So that's basically the work, I would say. right? So this is kind of the work. We could go into more details. Again, we don't have really time for that, but I would say, doing this work, building these capacities here, that's kind of what brings us together, I think, in this call. Kind of that's where we all, hold our peace. But what I would say is that today, as we see so much amplification of this upper space, including through, surveillance capitalism and so forth, right? Yeah, so the role of social media and of technology, kind of, so there could be, I could give a whole talk about this, right? Half a day, but you can see that for yourself because there's a lot of amplification going on up here. The question is, can we amplify this space here? And I think what's called there, what are we called to do, has to do with innovations and infrastructures, not only on an organizational, but also on a societal level, in terms of new learning infrastructures, new democratic and governance infrastructures, and new economic infrastructures that, shift our economy from ego to eco, from organized, from revolving around an ecosystem awareness to one that's organized around an ecosystem awareness, by which I mean an awareness that is focusing on the well-being of all. So I want to talk about this first part here, kind of the new learning infrastructures, whole person, whole system, because I think that's the space you're in, and I'm also in, kind of, so that's, but of course it relates to how to support these other two types of innovations and infrastructures. So let me just briefly explain to you what I mean with whole person and whole systems learning, right? Because, and if you only from this whole presentation remember one slide, this would be my suggestion, kind of, because it's something very simple. It's talk about the whole person and the whole system. And it's one slide that summarizes what today is going on in the whole space of learning and leadership. And I think what's going on today is two things. We see, number one, deepening, right? A deepening of the learning process from head-centric technical learning by listening, to reflective, which is head and hand, right? Learning by doing, to transformational learning, which requires us to bring in all three, head, heart, and hand, on the one hand. And the other thing we see is that we need to expand who is learning, from the individual to the team to the organization to the whole system. Now, what you see here is a matrix, right? And just ask yourself, okay, all the billions of dollars, the hundreds of billions of dollars that move into this space, right, across all societal institutions, where's all the money going in this matrix? And the answer, of course, is in the bottom left. And where to address the problems that Leslie and Amina talked about, where do they need to go? And the answer, of course, is in the top right. That's the problem. That's the shift. What is shifting? This, a focus where we build institutions, right, around this space here, to one that's looking at the entire matrix, right? And that's particularly looking at transformational learning infrastructures, not only on the level of the individual or team, but also on the level of the whole system. Now, that's basically the shift that I see going on, and where I try, and where I think we are in the process of developing prototypes and, and demonstrating how this can go to scale. So I want to close with like a systems view on a few spaces that I'm sure many of you are, already connected with a number of your projects. And one way to think about systems change is something very simple. Kind of, you use this, right? Kind of our smartphones, right? So what do we do with the smartphone? Well, once in a while, we upgrade the operating system, right? And the same, I believe, needs to happen on the level of systems change. And what I find so interesting is that we see the same operating systems applicable across all systems. So we see an evolution from input and authority-centric to output and efficiency-centric 2.0 to 3.0 outcome and user-centric to 4.0, something that's beginning now. So if you look at health and learning, so that's the past, right? Traditional doctor and teacher-centric structures. Today, we live in the world of 2.0, evidence-based medicine, output and efficiency focus, right? Or teaching for testing, right? Also known as bulimia learning, fast in, fast out. So not real learning, which brings us to 3.0, learner-centric infrastructures, right? The good school or the good healthcare system, right? Patient-centric. Is that the future? I don't think so. The future will move towards resilience, right? From dealing with symptoms of pathology towards strengthening sources of health and well-being. And we'll move from old type of curricula to activating the deep learning cycle that I was mentioning before. When you look at food and farm, we move from industrial monoculture, right? Well, so which is the mother of most of our environmental problems, to organic agriculture and food. That's better because it's reducing the negative footprint. Is it good enough? I don't think so. I think where we are moving into is food as medium for healing planet and people, right? And we see that Corona is actually a massive shift, can be a massive shift into that direction, kind of strengthening our hyper-localizing our food cycles. Corporate sustainability and CSR, from efficiency practices to innovation to mission-driven enterprises. When you look into finance, Leslie was talking a little bit about that, from extractive capital, aka Wall Street, externality blind, to impact investing, externality aware. That's better, but is it truly transformative? In many cases, not. So really focusing on systems transformation is the type of funding that's so much in need today. And all of that is, of course, embedded in the evolution of governance, right? The evolution of our larger governance system from, centralized and, the visible hand to the invisible hand of the market, and then complementing that with organized interest groups and lobbying. And now we see a shift to a fourth coordination mechanism that I call ABC, awareness-based collective action, which has to do with all the stakeholders coming together and bringing more intentionality into how we direct resources, how we direct economic resources, like, for example, our money, towards the well-being of all. So in summary, what is it we try to do? Planetary healing and civilizational renewal. The only way to make that work, I believe, is by activating generative social fields. That's the 4.0 shift, right? Kind of moving to this fourth level, this operating, the co-creative ecosystem way of operating. But what we see is that this cannot happen without building these new capacities, this kind of transformation literacy. And that's, I think, the missing, we need enabling infrastructures. That's what I meant with, whole person, whole systems infrastructures for learning. And that's, I believe, kind of where, youth needs to be put into the driver's seat of change. And what I'm working towards is to really democratize the access to transformation literacy by creating such a school for transformation that is based on integrating science, consciousness, social arts, and social technologies and in the context of profound social change. In order to support all these great initiatives that are already underway, but that often lack like an enabling infrastructures towards kind of this shift of a more ecosystemic way of operating.
So what I have now, I have a question for Otto, and then other question for Leslie. So Otto, one of the question is, does transformational system change require participants to give up some of the power and control? If so, how can we enable traditional power broker to change?
The short answer is yes. You saw that if you remember the second last slide, kind of the matrix, right? The move to 4.0. In terms of governance, it's moving from very centralized structures to decentralized, to network, to ecosystems. And as we evolve our governance systems, it means that yes, the power holders in the old system, they need to learn that they can effect more, they can accomplish more when they let go some of their power, because more possibility becomes available then. That's a very important shift. And I already Gandhi said that the enemy that we fight is not the other person, it's the old structure. So when you fight an old structure, you need to imagine and find new roles for the existing power holders, and also provide help, right? Help to that, in fact, when you move through this letting go of some of the traditional power resources, new possibilities open up for you. But they only open up when you first let go of the old stuff. So it's kind of this letting go, letting come dynamic, which is really key. And in my experience, to make that happen on both sides, let's say, of a conflict situations, you need support on either side. And that's kind of this support and learning infrastructure. That's what I mean with the top right of the matrix, kind of learning infrastructures on the level of the entire ecosystem that will provide these safe spaces for leaders to go and coach each other going through this process.
Another question to Otto is, you talk a lot about the individual shift. What about the organizational shift? How can an organization become a transformational organization, and how can that be applied to the YMCA?
Yeah, I mean, that's very critical. And I think that's actually the main focus of my work, because I think systems change does require individual change, but that's necessary. It's not sufficient, right? And just as on an individual level, I think to go to a profound through profound behavioral change, which is what we are talking about, you can't do it alone, right? You need the other, right? You need a group, you need a face-to-face, you need at least one other person that's holding you. We need a holding space, right? So that's where the real transformation happens. We know that from many face-to-face level profound changes. And the same, of course, is applicable to organizations. So that means an organization can go through profound transformation and change not alone. You need an ecosystem. So that's why the ecosystem matters. The ecosystem is really kind of the set of partners for an organization. And in most jobs we have, I mean, so most leadership jobs today, to be successful in your job, you need to change the behavior of other people that are outside of your own organizations. That's true for most of us, right? So how do you do that? Well, through the quality of relationships. Well, how do you improve that? Through the quality of your listening. It's kind of these kinds of things. I think kind of the ecosystem leadership challenge is universal today. And one of the things that, I mean, we know exactly what needs to happen, right? For all the, I mean, you can, including climate, right? You go to a project drawdown and so on. We know exactly the 80 solutions, everything. Why is it not happening? Why do we have this knowing doing gap? Because there is, a missing capacity to activate this co-creative leadership space on the whole systems level, on an ecosystem level. And that's so hard. I mean, so try to get, I mean, I find there's no problem in funding any kind of project, really. But if you really want to invest, the most important investments today would be building that deeper leadership capacity. It's almost impossible to get anything for that because people don't understand that this is kind of on that deeper structural level, that is kind of what's holding us back. So this building this deeper capacity or building this, transformation literacy kind of at the level of scale that's necessary today, which is the scale of the whole system, I think that's the big leverage point today.
Well, thanks. The challenge this is posing to us as a YMCA, one of what we do best is the leadership, building the leadership capacity of young people, leadership capacity of community leaders. So the question is, are we doing the right things? Are we at 1.023? Definitely not 4.0 from what your matches you show. So it's important that how do we transition from where we are to something that when we are empowering young people, we help to reboot currently what is happening to make sure that the result of our problem is truly transformative, not at the surface only. That's the challenge your presentation is giving to us now.
Yes, and I would say I mean I completely agree, and so the two, so where to pay attention to. So usually this kind of deeper transformational change, and we know that from all big system studies, right? Where does the change in systems come from? Well, not from the center, right? It comes from the periphery. So you want to go to the edges of the system because that's where you see the new happening first, right? And most clearly. So that would be one suggestion, right? Go to the edges, kind of lean into those areas of your system, around the edges of your system, where this new way of operating may be already happening, right? And make that more visible. So that's one. And the other one is, yes, everyone knows kind of for this ecosystemic way of operating, we need platforms and so on. Everyone knows that. But what is less attended to is that these platforms and all these nice things, digital things, only work if you create a container, right? If you create like a holding space, kind of that's kind of the social, mental. So if you create like a holding space, the container is facilitator speak for the set of for a holding space that allows you in a particular stakeholder groups, which will bring together people with very different interests, to drop to a deeper level of connection and co-creativity. That's really what the leadership work is, right? Kind of to creating these containers, bringing in kind of the stakeholders that need each other to change the system. So that's an ecosystem, right? So the ecosystem of stakeholders is people who need each other to change the system, and then creating an environment for them to make progress, right? And to access their deeper sources of creativity. And that's what I find inspiring is that, a lot of that takes place locally. Kind of that's kind of where you can have a great starting point. Leslie also made reference to that. And then, of course, we need to aggregate, we need to connect all these, and you need to kind of bring this new way of operating also to the higher levels of systems. But we have examples there too. I think kind of the whole Paris Agreement process is an example of that, where as a global community, we rise to the occasion. The whole response to Corona is an example of that, where as a global community, we rise to the occasion. We are bending the curve. We are focusing as a global community on one topic, right? And align our attention with our intention. And so the moment we do that, we can flatten the curve, we can bend the curve, and we can apply the same decisiveness and the same intentionality of really transforming our collective behavior, transforming our systems, also to climate action and some of the other key challenges that we talked about. I think that's the learning that we all have been learning over the past few weeks. Everyone knows that. Now, are we going to use that?
Thank you.